Hey guys, it's Haven, and this is the chapter discussion for chapter 1065 of One Piece, which is titled The Six Faces of Vegapunk. So this time there's not a cover story, so we're just going to get right into the meat of the chapter. So let's go. Our first segment begins with Zoro and Brook, so they stay behind on the Sunny, while the rest of the Straw Hats went ahead. And we already kind of assumed why they stayed behind, just in case and to protect the ship and stuff. But they say that, this is a government island. They could easily get trapped, they could easily get caught, and if they do, we should really have some people behind to make sure that they can get rescued. I kind of think that this means we can anticipate a fight between CP0 and Zoro and Brook, since we know that they're headed to Egghead, and realistically they're going to pass by Zoro and Brook before they get to Vegapunk. So they'll probably either fight the Kuma Pacifista Seraphim, or they'll fight the actual CP0 members. Maybe we'll actually find out, this is just a theory, but what if the reason why the Seraphim, that's the Kuma one, has been acting out is because his consciousness is actually in that Seraphim? Maybe? And we could have some cool stuff happening there, but I don't know, who's to say? The other part of this little scene is between those two and Caribou, and it's really funny because Caribou's like, hey, so I know we made a deal about dropping me off anywhere but Wano, but this is a government island, so maybe not here. And Zoro's like, oh yeah, I heard you saved our captain or helped our captain out. Thanks. See ya. And I'm just like, damn, Zoro and Brook are savages. They're like, yeah, goodbye. See ya. So that's the end of that little chunk, and then we move on to the next group. So the next group that we move on to is still another segment of the Straw Hats, and we have Robin, Sanji, Nami, Franky, and Usopp. And they're all just kind of really, amazed and in awe of all the different, scientific gadgets and the systems that are in place in Vegapunk's lab. And Franky's asking, how does this work? And Lilith's answer is just to say, it kind of runs on fire power, and you can convert its power into all kinds of energy. And then I'm assuming this is Franky that says this, that doesn't that burn through a lot of natural resources? And then Lilith says that they're always looking for more economic resources and more viable resources, and how she would like to have an eternal flame that's just constantly pushing out energy, but it's not really a thing she can just make. So we also see more of the different panels. We see there's an escalator type thing, this weird funky tube that it's inside of, and then Lilith gets intercommed on her little transponder thing, and she just walks through this giant metal door thing, and they're like, Lilith, let us through, and she's like, what, just go through. And so we see Sanji poking his head through, and then we see Robin phasing through. And so this door has the ability to change its state of matter, I guess. So it can probably vibrate to allow particles to transfer or something like that. And then it can stop that process so that it actually shuts like a legitimate door. And Lilith tells them to keep going ahead. And so, they're all still fangirling and boying over all the different stuff in the lab. And then we meet Vegapunk Edison, and this one, it says it has a very heavy Kansai accent, so we see the translation's a little bit different. They kind of give it that more southern accent that we see a lot of the time when we're transferring accents. And they tell them to just keep walking ahead, and we see that the Straw Hats have walked into what is clearly a trap. And this is Seraphim Number 4 that they run into. And the Seraphim Number 4 is actually modeled off of Jinbei. So with this Seraphim, we can see again they have the white hair, they have the black wings, and the flames on the back. But the only thing I'm not entirely sure of is whether or not this Seraphim has the brown skin like we saw with King and the other Seraphim so far, or if because the Seraphim is Jinbei's DNA, which is Fishman DNA, if that's going to make the color different, or if the color is going to be that brown color that we've seen so far with the other ones. And then, of course, we also have the golden eyes with the star pupils. And this is the first time the Straw Hats have seen a Seraphim, right? We haven't encountered one at this point, except for different characters in the story. Like we know with Kobe and Boa Hancock and Blackbeard, they all were fighting the Hancock and Mihawk Seraphims, and then of course we know that there's a Kuma Seraphim that we saw that was with CP0. But this Seraphim, I think, is the fourth one that we've seen so far, and I think we can safely assume that the fact that we've seen Hancock, Mihawk, and Jinbei, that these Seraphims are modeled off of the original warlords that we had at the start of the series, like pre-time skip. So I would assume we probably aren't going to see a Law. We probably aren't going to see like an Edward Weevil. We probably aren't going to see a Blackbeard one. And I'm trying to think, or Buggy. I think that's all of the newer warlords, but I'm not entirely sure. I don't expect to see those ones as Seraphim, just because it seems to be that the older ones, so that means we might have a Doflamingo one, a Crocodile one, etc. I'm also nervous because I really, really think we're gonna see a Goldie Roger Seraphim, and like if Luffy has to go against Roger's Seraphim, that's gonna be fucking nuts. Just saying that right now, like that would be insane. Same with like a Kaido Seraphim, because we know Kaido was in the lab as well, which is kind of crazy. Like, Luffy having to fight Kaido with the Lunarian DNA mixed in there, like, that would be actually insane. The other thing to note with this scene between the Straw Hat group that is with Franky and the Jinbei Seraphim is, like, they clearly understand that this is not Jinbei, and they're like, why does this look like Jinbei? Like, even if it is Jinbei, like, this is not acceptable behavior, and they start beating the shit out of it. We get to see, like, some of the Straw Hats, you know, fighting. We see Sanji kicking the shit out of it. We see Robin's Gigantaflor that we saw when she was fighting the spider chick back in Wano. And apparently the Jinbei Seraphim can also use Fishman Karate. And he has Senor Pink's fruit where he can swim through the ground, because Franky recognizes it. He's like, wait, I know that devil fruit power. Like, how does he have that devil fruit power? And they're just beating the ever-living shit out of it. And as that's happening, we have a different Vegapunk that we actually see. So we were talking to the Edison Vegapunk through the headset, but now we actually see the Edison Vegapunk. And we actually meet a couple more Vegapunks in this timeline. So we meet the next couple in a pretty brief period of time, but before that happens, the Vegapunk Edison is like, oh my god, like, they need to stop. And Franky is like using a beam, and he's like, how the hell does he have a beam? Like, what is that guy? And the Edison is saying, like, the Seraphim is still just a kid, so we really can't put it through a laser test right now. That was a plan for later. This is getting kind of risky. And Lola's like, yeah, like, those are really expensive. Like, we can't really have them destroying it. And so they break up the fight between the Straw Hats and the Seraphim. And then we meet the next couple. So we have Pythagoras, who seems like their job is like to calculate stuff and do like data collection and mapping. And then we have this Vegapunk one that just like pretty much sleeps, eats, and shits. And this one is York. So the way that it is set up, so we've met all of the Vegapunk personas at this point, and the way that they work is that they're all kind of connected and perform different tasks because Vegapunk doesn't want to waste time because he has all these ideas and all these things he wants to accomplish. So each of the Vegapunk satellites, as they were called earlier in this arc, they all serve like different functions. So we have a Yoke, whose job is to sleep, eat, and like shit. So that version is taking care of all of like the bodily functions. Then we have Atlas, who is like the tester, who's constantly beating up different inventions and projects to make sure they're sturdy and secure, and that kind of seems like that's that one's job. Then we have Pythagoras, whose job seems to be like data collection and mapping and just kind of like putting in any input data to further along experiments and whatnot. Then we have Edison, who is the inventor and is constantly making blueprints and creating new ideas for different projects. We have Lilith, Lilith seems to be the one that goes out and collects resources, like we saw in the beginning. So she's constantly like hunting pirate ships and other stuff that she can steal money from, that way they can get funding. And then we have Shaka. Shaka seems to be the one that has the consciousness closest to Vegapunk himself, like the main body, with the logic and just understanding situations and relationships and whatnot, because we saw him talking to Dragon at some point in the last chapter, and they all serve like different roles and overall connect to the main body. And I'm not sure if the main body is even functional. Like, we don't actually know how old Vegapunk is, and we don't actually know if he split these personalities because his main body was like deteriorating. Like, he could be in like a fucking cryogenic tube or some shit, but I would assume that the main body is probably not as high functioning as the satellites are, and that's why he has the satellites. But I guess that we aren't gonna get answers to that right away. So after that happens, and the fight is still happening, and we're seeing like all these new versions of Vegapunk, all the different satellites, we see Shaka come into it, and apparently the boots that everybody has on not only function to make like the movement light and steady and whatnot, they also can lock to the floor. He has them set up so that they're like magnetized or something, and they can get stuck to the floor to keep people in check if they're getting out of control. So Shaka magnetizes Franky's group to the floor and stops the Seraphim Jinbei and the other Vegapunk satellites that are kind of egging on this fight. And I love this next little bit where Shaka is like, oh, like, I'm also Vegapunk, you know, like, there's a couple other ones too. And then Usopp goes, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, I'm Vegapunk too. Which I think is hysterical. And I think, like, I love all the memes that are going around it, where they're like, I'm a bit of a Dr. Vegapunk myself, and like shit like that. That shit's hysterical. So Shaka asks the Straw Hats, do you think this island looks like the future? And Franky's like, it's beyond the future. I mean, like, just look at those mecha sea beasts. I've never seen anything like this place before. Like, it's so futuristic. There's like the mecha beasts, there's these giant robot things, there's all these cool technology things. Like, you have to show me a tour. Like, Vegapunk, like, you're like my idol, like, this is so cool. And he says, well, actually, it's quite the contrary. This is an island of the past. And Franky's like, what? And at the same time, we pan over to Luffy's group, and Luffy, Bonnie, Chopper, and Jinbei are like staring at this giant, massive hunk of armor that's like rusted and falling apart, but it's still mostly intact. It's just got a couple like torn pieces. And if you recall back on Thriller Bark, and the Paramount War, we had Oars and Oars Jr., who were these giant beast type giants. I don't really know. They're just like, they're horned. They're just giant horned giants. And I have a feeling that this armor is connected to that because the shape of the horns on the helmet of this armor and just how massive the body is, we're probably going to get into the lore of that dead race, the continent polars, and talk about how all of these countries and nations and the whole world came into part and existence and whatnot. So then Shaka and Franky are still talking, and Franky's like, what do you mean by the past? And Shaka says, well, what if I were to tell you that long ago there was once a highly advanced kingdom, not unlike Egghead when it comes to technology, a civilization from 900 years ago. Would you believe me? And that's kind of where we leave it, with just Luffy's group staring at the giant mech. I'm very excited for this because not only are we going to be getting information about the 100-Year Void, we're going to be getting information about what led to the 100-Year Void, not just the wars and splitting of nations, splitting of people, separating the Celestial Dragons and all of that, and, you know, the races that went extinct during that period, or close to extinct during that period. But we're also going to be learning about the civilizations that existed before this, which makes me pretty confident in that cover story that Enel was in when he went to the moon and we saw all those, like, tiny robotic automatronic little guys. I don't really know what to call them, but we're gonna learn more about that. We're gonna learn probably about the continent polars and Oars 2, because we know Oars Jr. is like Oars 3, because it said it on his boat, Oars 3. So we'll probably learn more about the continent polars and that race. If this giant armor existed, that means that Egghead Island had these people on there at some point, right? They had these continent polar giants that had the horns. And I think we're definitely going to learn about the history with the races, the history of Joy Boy, why these races went extinct. Did the government kill them? Did they fight in the war and lose? Like, how did they lose if they're that much bigger than all of the other races? Like, there's so much stuff that I think is going to get tackled really soon, and I'm just really excited. Yeah. I think it's really interesting that Egghead is the point that all of this stuff existed. Like, it makes me wonder, did the government miss it? Did the government not see that all of these remains of the old civilizations were still here? Did Dr. Vegapunk set up shop here knowing this and wanted to cover it up and hide it because he's actually part of the Revolutionary Army and whatnot? Or, you know, does the government, because my thought is, like, if the government was aware of these armors and these things being left behind, are they that much of a red flag for them to want to destroy it? Because at the same time, like, they knew that Gecko Moria. The Gecko Moria was messing around with the carcass of Oars on Thriller Bark. Like, they were aware of that. They were aware of what he was doing, because I'm sure they monitor all of these people. And, like, are we just supposed to believe that these giants that have the horns like that, like the Oni looking giants, like, are we just supposed to accept, like, as the people in One Piece, not necessarily us as the reader, like, are we supposed to be accepting that these beings used to exist? Or, you know, it's like, I don't know, there's, like, so much just going on in my head right now, and I'm very excited to see what happens. I'm gonna stop there. Thank you for tuning in. If you did, feel free to comment, helps me out. Yeah, I'm excited for the next chapter. See you soon. Bye.